Alexandra Levine welcomes you to the Alexandra Levine Live Podcast. Today, we've got a packed show, from breaking news to informative topics that will keep you well informed. So, please click the subscribe button to get notified of her upcoming episodes. If you like what Alexandra talks about, then please share the Alexandra Levine Live to others. Alexandra also looks forward to your comments during this episode. Tonight's Alexandra Levine Live Podcast starts now.
Well, hello, everyone. Hello. This is Alexandra Levine live with the America's Pulse Network. We have an exclusive interview for you tonight with Ugrósdy Márton. He serves as the Deputy State Secretary in the Office of the Prime Ministers in Budapest, Hungary. And there's his picture right there. Ugrósdy previously directed the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade and taught at Corvinus University of Budapest. Ugrósdy holds a PhD in political science from Corvinus University, specializing in public management and foreign policy. We want to bring him on right now for this exclusive interview.
Hey, Alexandra. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. Thank you so much for coming on. So this first segment is talking about specifically about energy independence. And I know that's one of your biggest strong suits. And that's what we kind of talked about when we met in Budapest. So the first question for you is, does Hungary rely on Russia's oil/energy supply?
Well, we do and we don't. We do in a way that we've been reliant on these pipeline transit systems for the last 50 years, since Soviet times, where we used to be a satellite of the Soviet Union. So it actually made a lot of sense for the Russians to build all these pipelines, also to support their armed forces in the region. If you remember, that was before the fall of the Iron Curtain, so they had millions of people in arms in all the satellites in East Central and Eastern Europe, and obviously they had to supply them with oil and gas and everything else which you need to run an army. And when the regime change happened in 1990 and the Soviet Union fell apart in 91, we were left with the pipelines, basically. And Russia still had a great deal of energy resources, and the price was relatively cheap because nobody really had to pay for the pipe because it was already there. So we did not really have any capital costs incurred. So on that account, transit fees were always competitive. But based on the experience of the gas wars between Russia and Ukraine in 2006 and 2009, all of the Central European countries, including Hungary, started to invest in diversifying energy routes. So we have built connecting pipelines to the neighboring countries. You also have to know that we're a landlocked country, so we do not have access to the sea. Therefore, we do rely on the cooperation of our neighboring countries. Most of them are NATO allies and fellow EU member states. So we should be having a normal working relationship. But this is Central Europe, so obviously political differences do exist. So against the backdrop of diversifying the routes, the Russians were so far able to offer the most competitive price for both oil and gas. And since the price of energy is very crucial, I think the US is just going through this process as we speak, as the price of gas is rising basically every second day. This is also a very sensitive issue for our population. So we're going to make sure that we're buying from the cheapest possible sources. And so far, there's been Russia. But of course, the market is changing. Access to these resources and the overland route has been changing. There's been a war next door in Ukraine, which has impacted the reliability of these systems. So now we're working both with Russia and Ukraine, but also with Croatia and a bunch of other providers to supply the energy needs that we have.
So does cutting off Russia's oil and energy supply affect the cost of living in Hungary?
So far not, because the government is intervening. But if it stays like this for long term, then obviously it will spiral into the prices that the Hungarian citizens are paying for gas. And it's not only the fuel that you tank in your car, but it's also electricity generation when it comes to natural gas and residential heating. So one thing which is often overlooked, that quite a lot of Hungarian households are running on natural gas when it comes to heating, both when it comes to direct heating, like you literally burn it in different heating devices in your home, or even if you use what is called central heating, that you have a big housing estate with lots of apartment blocks, and there's a central small power plant which is producing hot water for all the flats which are being heated through this method. This method became very known when the winter bombardment campaign of Russia took place in Ukraine, because you literally had these very gray and tall apartment blocks freezing during the winter, because hot water was not available anymore, because obviously the Russians have bombed these small power plants, so people would be forced to flee their homes because it was so cold. So for that reason, this remains a residential issue to quite a great extent, and therefore the price of gas is one of the crucial issues that we have back here.
Now, as you mentioned, we're going through a huge war with Russia and Ukraine. Does anyone in Hungary believe that Zelensky is going to pay back the billions he took?
No. I mean, if you look at the previous announcements, all the talk about the loan have been conditional on whether Russia is going to pay them damages at the end, some kind of a reparation to Ukraine. Well, if that for happen, obviously you need to defeat Russia first, and we don't really see that coming, to be honest. I mean, you usually don't defeat nuclear powers. But even if it did, I mean, nobody really knows how it would actually work. And obviously that will put an additional strain. I mean, especially if the EU provides a loan which is not paid back, that obviously puts a strain on EU finances too. And this is one big part of the debate that we're having with the European Union right now, that how Ukraine should be financed in the long run. Our opinion is very simple. If there's any EU member state who wants to support Ukraine financially, I mean, we're not objecting that. They're free to do so. Of course, that means that they will have to go, those governments should go to their national parliaments asking for this money. But we wouldn't really like the European Union to take out a collective loan for two reasons. First, many claim that this will be the Hamiltonian moment of the European Union, which will put it in the direction of further and deeper integration, which we're trying to avoid because we are for national sovereignty. And on the other hand, we wouldn't like to pay back a loan that we do not use. So it's a bit like that. I take out a mortgage on your house to repair mine. So that logic obviously can be justified under certain conditions, but we don't think that those conditions exist at the moment.
So explain the situation with you guys and the European Union. And the follow-up question to the one I just asked you is, why doesn't the liberals of the European Union send their shares to Zelensky?
I don't know. I mean, I think the most important reason is that wouldn't really go down with their national assemblies, because most of the European countries have been going through a major economic crisis since the war started in 2022. To a large extent because of the failed economic sanctions that we have installed against Russia in the meantime. And we already had 19 rounds, and as Secretary Bessent was joking the other day, if you've been trying something for 19 times, maybe you're not being really successful in that anyway. But the point is rather that, you know, most of the European countries are under enormous strain when it comes to their finances. They should pay for the war. They should pay for illegal immigration. They're paying for declining competitiveness. We're losing jobs by the tens of thousands on the European level. Fortunately, not in Hungary, but in most of the European countries. Factories are fleeing because the cost of doing business is so high. Regulation is very much complicated. Energy prices have been going across the roof. So on that account, most of the European budgets are just not in a situation that they could deal with an additional, let's say, 50 billion euros a year that we would give to Ukraine.
So Hungary and the United States of America, we're NATO allies. Yeah. Zelensky wants to become an ally of NATO with us. Why or why not do you think that's a good idea?
Well, NATO is a defensive alliance, first of all. It's a political alliance too. So it's a political military organization, as they call it. And we do think that Ukraine is just not ready yet to join. Maybe they will. I don't know. I mean, we should give everybody the benefit of the doubt. And obviously, once the war stops and they work out all the political things and they find out where the borders of the country should be, this is something that we can discuss. But right now, in the middle of the war, this will be suicidal for NATO, to be honest, because we would be importing a war into the alliance. And obviously, then everybody all of a sudden would become responsible for that war. And if you look at Russian military doctrine, it's quite clear that they will have only one kind of war with NATO, and that's a complete nuclear war. And I don't think anybody wants that. And if you look at what happened when the real stress tests arrived, like a missile fell in Poland, killing 2 people just on their tractor, or there have been drones intercepted in Romania, even senior NATO leaders said that, okay, calm down, let's have a look at what happened, don't rush to conclusions immediately, which tells you the message that even the NATO military command and the political leaders know what the game is really about, But you see lots of posturing and virtue signaling along the way that how we should help Ukraine all the time, as long as it takes, whatever it takes, as President Biden used to say. We think we should be more honest with the Ukrainians. We should tell them that we would like them to be a successful country. We would like them to be a secure country, but maybe the best way to achieve that is not an immediate accession to NATO, but first closing the war, then coming to some terms with all the neighbors, and then we can discuss all these questions. Even though I think at that moment in time, the Russians will have a few words to say about this, but obviously we're not there yet. And the Hungarians are just trying to underline very strongly that this is not a debate that we can have at the moment because the preconditions are not met.
So discuss trade in your country, because when President Trump came in, he's all about putting the tariffs on countries that have literally screwed us, and he's about America first. So describe the trade situation in your country and how Hungary works with the United States in regards to trade.
Most of our trade is with the European Union. Quite obviously, we're part of the single market. We're sitting in the center of Europe. Most of our neighboring countries are EU and NATO member states. And the biggest economic center we have in the neighborhood is Germany. Now, Germany has its own problems and stuff like that. But on that account, our priority has been to diversify our trade. The good thing is that we have doubled our trade in the last 10 years. The bad thing is that the structure is still the same. So 80% of that goes to the EU, 20% goes to everywhere else. We export more than we import. There's a slight difference, maybe 10 to 12%. And to be very honest, we do run a trade surplus against the United States too. Of course, we're just right now, we're working on balancing that. So we've been investing in American energy technology, nuclear, and possibly LNG as well. Of course, that comes down to the strained market that we have at the moment because of the war in Iran. But we signed many deals with President Trump when the Prime Minister was visiting Washington in November. And we're also started to invest in American military hardware. And obviously, we take the defense of the country and also the defense of NATO seriously. Therefore, we're completely in line with the 5-request pledge that President Trump was requesting from all the NATO allies last year. And we're more than ready to walk the walk. We've been expanding our defense industrial base. We've been spending much more on defense than we used to 10 years ago. Of course, there's quite a lot of things that we have to upgrade in our military because on one hand, we haven't been spending on that for the initial 25 years after independence because we were broke. And on the other hand, we have a war next door. So obviously, we have to draw the consequences and upgrade our military accordingly. But this is going to be a long process, and we will be spending a lot of money along the way. And looking at the quality of American technology, I think there's quite a lot of promising projects coming up there.
Now, do you agree with what President Trump is doing in regards to tariffs? And please explain to the American people why tariffs are good or tariffs are bad.
I think the major difference with President Trump that he's being very honest that he puts the interest of the American people first. And he's responsible for American jobs. He's responsible for American factories. He's responsible for American trade. And of course, everything which is connected to that has an impact on global trade and America-Europe trade as well. But President Trump is elected by the American people, and therefore he's responsible to the American people and nobody else. And we understand that this is a bit unusual in Europe in a way that most of the previous American presidents were talking quite a lot of nice things, but still they were protecting the American economic interest. At the end of the day, President Trump is being very honest about it, which makes our job much more easier because we know what he's up to. And you don't have to, believe in these nice talking things and stuff like that. And you can do deals with President Trump and also with the administration, which makes this much easier if you accept the rules of the game. And this is what sets Hungary apart from most of the EU member states, because we consider President Trump as a serious leader who's working for the interest of the country. And we're having a very honest conversation with both him, of course, on the level of the Prime Minister, and also the level of the administration when it comes to our line ministries, at what the Americans want to do, what we want to do, where that overlaps, and what kind of mutually beneficial relationships we can work out based on that. Energy is one of that, for example. Military cooperation is another. And of course, we do understand that the Americans have to make money to make their companies profitable. We need capabilities that the Americans can provide. So it's a win-win cooperation for both of us. And most of the European states and most of the European leaders are quite happy to bash President Trump all the time. They were bashing him when he was running for re-election. They were hating him during his first term. So on that account, as the joke goes, most of the Europeans love to hate Republican American presidents, and President Trump even more so. But if you want to deal with President Trump in the long run, you cannot hate him, at least not publicly, because that will put you in a very bad situation once you end up in the Oval Office, as we've seen with many European leaders visiting. So on that account, I think having an honest relationship with President Trump certainly helps. Certain European leaders are learning this right now. Certain others do not absolutely want to come to terms with reality because they think this is going to be over in 4 years anyway, and they're just going to survive somehow. I think the world is changing so quickly that you cannot be in survival mode for 4 years now. You have to accept that President Trump is the leader the American people have elected for very good reasons, and he's the guy you have to deal with. And once you accept that, I think it all of a sudden becomes much easier, because it becomes a very straightforward and very honest relationship that we're also enjoying with the administration.
Amen. Amen to that. Now, one thing that I notice is you still go by your original currency, the florins, as opposed to Austria and others that have switched to the euro. Are you going to stay with the florins? Is there any talk in the future that you will switch to the euro?
Not until as long as this government is on power. So basically what you're looking at when it comes to the Eurozone has been a very slow growth rate for the last at least 10 years. That comes from the fact that, these are quite a bunch of different countries. It's really hard to compare the German economy to the Estonian economy, for example. Even the Portuguese and the Greek economy is very much different. Therefore, if you want to have your own monetary and fiscal policy, you need national sovereignty in order to address your economic problems the most effectively on the national level. But once you adopt the euro, you just give up that power to Frankfurt, where the European Central Bank is located, and to the European Commission, which is located in Brussels, far away from Greece and Portugal and Malta and Estonia, or Finland for that instance. We do believe that fiscal and monetary policy is one of the most crucial aspects of your national policies. It's a crucial part of your competitiveness, and being able to change the prime rate and all these tools are essential to keep your country as competitive as possible. I think it also tells a story that how the Trump administration is approaching the selection of the new Fed chair, which has a lot to do with American economic sovereignty and how competitive your country will be in the long run. And I think the euro is the writing on the wall that what you shouldn't be doing and how you shouldn't be outsourcing fiscal and monetary policy to outsiders if you want to run a competitive economy. And for these very reasons, we will keep this in national hands as long as possible. And as long as the numbers go, the last 10, 15 years have not been that convincing for us to switch to the euro. Many other countries in the region did, like Bulgaria just joined this January, Croatia did join last year. But to be honest, it hasn't been such a successful project for each of them. Croatia is a bit different because they're heavily relying on tourism. So of course, for tourism, having the euro is great because your tourists don't have to change money when they come to the country, and they can understand prices right away. But if you have a real economy, if you have manufacturing, if you're focused on manufacturing jobs, you want to have your own national currency, or at least this is our experience.
Now, would you say in your country that you're focused more on manufacturing jobs?
That's been a priority for the last 15 years. So when we came to government in 2010, which is already 16 years ago, it's quite a long time, the unemployment rate has been a major problem. We were in the wake of the 2008 financial economic crisis. And when the prime minister was re-elected in 2010, he promised to add 1 million jobs in 10 years. And we're a country of 10 million people, so that's a significant portion of our population. And he was actually able to achieve that by 2019. So before the pandemic struck, he fulfilled his promise. And that was mostly through manufacturing that came to the country from abroad, from Europe, from the United States, but also from Asia, countries like South Korea, Singapore, India, China as well. Opened many new factories in the country, which provided jobs for thousands and thousands of people. And since we do believe in a workfare economy, we believe that work gives the basic dignity to people that makes them more successful in society, makes them more self-aware of their achievements, makes them proud of themselves, which also makes it much easier to build a family or do anything in life. Putting people to work has been one of the key priorities. Our tax system is also designed on work. We have a flat personal income tax rate, which is 15%. And most of the tax credits you can get, like for your family, for your buying a house after your kids, is a tax deductible portion of your salary. So in order to be eligible in a serious way, you have to work, because that's the foundation of everything.
That's great. And I was going to say, in America, there's some governors that are trying to get rid of the property tax. As Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida, and the new guy coming in Ohio, Vivek Ramaswamy, who's picked to win, they want to get rid of property taxes in their states. And Florida, as you know, is a state that doesn't have income tax. What is your opinion on that?
We don't have a property tax, or at least for those houses and flats where somebody's living. So if you use your real estate for living purposes, you don't have to pay a property tax. Of course, if you lease it to someone or anything like that, you're supposed to be paying something. But we put a great emphasis on people owning their own houses. And obviously, if you tax that, it's a bit weird. On the other hand, we don't believe that the state should know how much your piece of real estate costs at the end of the day. Because if you have to pay property tax, somebody has to establish the value of the property that you use or that you live in. And since most of the Hungarians have been subject to state surveillance during communist times, this is a bit freaky that somebody from the state comes with a checkered paper and writes how much money your house is worth. I mean, that happened to Hungary a few times in the 20th century. It never really ended up well. So we're trying to avoid that, because the state shouldn't know how much a flat costs. And that's a basic prohibition of installing property tax. Having said that, right now, as you mentioned, we're in the middle of an election campaign. The opposition candidate is actually calling for property tax for, I think, houses worth more than $1.5 million or something like that. So obviously, once again, in order to know that which pieces of property cost more than that, you have to have a full register of all the properties in the country to be able to determine that which properties will be taxed and which won't.
So I happened to actually drive through Austria, which is your neighbor, and there was a ton of windmills. And as you know, that's something that President Trump is completely against. And going to you, because you're an energy guy, did the windmills and solar panels, did they get preferential treatment and subsidies?
Well, first of all, we don't really like windmills because they're ugly and unreliable,
Exactly.
to be very honest. So a couple of years ago, the government passed a piece of legislation which prohibited building windmills in the vicinity, like in a 5-kilometer radius of settlements, because you just look out your window and it looks bad, to be very honest. On the other hand, we were lucky with the windmills in a way that we're not a particularly windy country. We don't have high mountains. So on that account, there's not a big business case for building windmills en masse, because you cannot produce that amount of energy that would make them profitable in the long run. Solar panels are a little bit more interesting. We have quite a lot of sunshine, so it makes sense to use them. Most of the solar panels installed are on houses, so they're in residential use. So basically, you put the panels on the top of your house, and if you have some kind of an energy storage facility like an electric car or something like that, you can charge it. You can also sell it to the electricity wholesale provider, which will pay you some amount of money. But that's more about self-sufficiency when it comes to running your own small energy grid in your house or in your apartment. Of course, there have been some subsidies for that also to reduce our energy dependence on Russia. So on that account, the more solar panels we install, the less energy we'll have to import from abroad. So this comes down to the sovereignty argument to some extent as well, that if you can produce most of your energy for yourself, like the United States, you will be more freer to conduct your own foreign and domestic policies. You can control the price and so on and so forth. We're not so well endowed with natural energy sources, but we do have sunshine, at least in the summer. So having solar panels made a lot of sense. And installed capacity has grown significantly in the last 10 years. But on the other hand, of course, there are some state subsidies involved at the end of the day, but that's mostly for residential consumers. So it's not that, we pay big electricity companies to cover our fields with solar panels. Most of the funding actually goes to everyday people trying to, run their own small power plant on the top of their houses.
As you know, in America, we have leftists that were pushing the Green New Deal, which President Trump calls the Green New Scam.
Yeah, he's right, actually.
which it is. I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. And the interesting thing is there's states such as California that want to get rid of just all regular cars that need gas and just push electronic cars permanently. What is your opinion on that? What do you think about that?
Well, first of all,
Would that even work?
Don't do it. I mean, Europe has been experimenting with that for the last 10 years. Look at our numbers. Look at our economy. Look at the energy price. Look at how much we pay for electricity. I mean, Germany made a completely surreal political decision in the wake of the Fukushima disaster in 2011 that nuclear power plants are bad. Nobody knows why, but nuclear power plants are bad and they should be decommissioned. And they actually blew up most of their nuclear power plants after decommissioning them, and now they're surprised that they don't have cheap electricity. I mean, what you guys were expecting? First of all, I mean, you destroyed a significant amount of your generation capacity, and now you're surprised that the price of electricity is much higher than it used to be. I mean, it's basic economics, to be very honest. But somehow they forgot that because they had the Green Party in government, and obviously their Green Party was very opposed to nuclear power plants because nuclear power plants are bad. Nuclear power plants are bad. Nobody knows why, but they're bad. On that account, I think you have to be as pragmatic as possible. And all countries and all states in the US are different. Of course, some countries do have enormous hydro capacities, Austria being one of them. But if you look at the states in the Rockies, obviously they do have some comparative advantage there because they have the rivers, and even in the Pacific Northwest, you see, I mean, you have the Columbia River and a bunch of other big things which can be utilized to generate lots of electricity. On the other hand, in Arizona, it might make sense to install solar cells in the middle of the desert because they're not really bothering anybody out there. And obviously that gets lots of sunshine throughout the year. So it really comes down to the localities and the geography, that what works and what doesn't. And we're not building hydropower plants because we're a flat country. But we're experimenting with solar because we have quite a lot of solar capacity and we have quite a lot of sunshine. We do believe in nuclear. That's been one of the most competitive sources of energy that we have. We're just in the middle of building another nuclear power plant, and we are also starting a cooperation with the US when it comes to small modular reactors. So we've been actively looking at this because the price seems to be competitive, and you can operate these systems very independently from any outside factors, which is, of course, important for us because of the sovereignty argument. So on that account, we do believe that every country should have the right to set up their own energy mix. And, I wouldn't really advise the Californians to go completely green because you will need oil and gas and traditional energy sources as well. But we're certainly not going to tell them what they should do because it's up to them. It's up to their political decision makers who are accountable to the people of California, or at least presumably accountable to the people of California, to come up with those decisions that they see as the best.
Exactly. So turning back into oil, so does Hungary get oil from the pipeline from Azerbaijan to Georgia? And do you know of any Shiites that are looking to blow up that pipeline? I know there was some talk about that internationally abroad. Yeah,
well, the war in Iran has led to quite a lot of unexpected consequences, and the drones falling in Azerbaijan have been one of those. Of course, this is of concern to us, even though our exposure to the Caucasus is more in natural gas than in oil. So on that account, we are looking at these developments very seriously because we need all the alternative sources that we have at the moment. And Azerbaijan has been a reliable supplier, and obviously we have to transport gas from Azerbaijan to Europe. And that actually goes through both Georgia and Turkey and a bunch of other countries along the way. So anything that threatens supply is of a major concern to us. When it comes to oil, that's been shipped. If we cannot use the pipeline from Russia, then we are reliant on Croatia. And there's a port terminal in Croatia, which is the closest to us. So once we get there, we can connect to the entire global market. So of course, if the terminals in the Black Sea, but either in Russia or Georgia, gets struck or anything happens to them, which has an overall impact on global energy prices and the price of oil, just as we see it with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, that's a major concern for us. So pipeline security is crucially important, absolutely. I mean, we're watching that, and we're in close contact with our friends in Azerbaijan to know that what's going on. On the other hand, the terminal allows us the possibility to look elsewhere as well. So for that instance, we've contracted some providers from Libya and North Africa to make up for the losses that we had because of the closure of the pipeline going back to almost 1.5 months now.
Oh, wow. Oh, my gosh. Well, this has been just an awesome half hour. We are going to take a quick break. I'm here exclusively with Ugrósdy Márton, who's the Deputy State Secretary of the Office of the Prime Minister in Budapest, Hungary. Please stay with us. We will be right back after the break.
America's Pulse Network. The mainstream media is bought and paid for. The truth is twisted to fit their agenda. But America is waking up. Because podcasts are the future for trusted media. Welcome to the America's Pulse Network. It is a network built by patriots that upholds the Constitution. But America's Pulse Network stands for God, truth, and the America First movement. There is no corporate propaganda, no government spin, just real news, real talk, and real voices fighting for faith, freedom, and the future of this great nation with common sense. Here are some of America's Pulse Network podcasts. Alexandra Levine Live, hosted by Alexandra Levine. Jersey Shore Podcast, hosted by Damon Galdo. The Conservative Corner, hosted by Seth Eisenberg. The New Jersey State House Watch, hosted by Jack Brangan and Constance Detzel. APN's The Pulse is moderated by either Alexandra, Damon, Elena, or Seth. Also tune into America's Pulse Network on the following social media platforms: X, Rumble, Truth Social, Parler, Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify. Join the revolution because the pulse of America beats for God and country. America's Pulse Network is for faith, family, freedom, and truth.
Well, thanks for joining us again. I'm Alexandra Levine live with the America's Pulse Network. We are live with Ugrósdy Márton, who is the Deputy State Secretary of the Office of the Prime Minister in Budapest, Hungary. Segment 2, Ugrósdy, it centers on the USA Hungary Alliance. And a lot of my friends, they said to me, why did you go to Budapest? Why would you go there? And I'm like, it's such a beautiful country, number one. And it's so independent. It's not under communist and socialism anymore. You guys have totally gone away from that. And as a Jewish woman, I love the fact that you support the Jewish people. And I didn't have to worry about a pro-Hamas protest or a free Palestine from the river to the sea type of protest over there. And I know you and I touched on that. It's very scary to know that in America, they had a lot of those pro-Hamas rallies at college campuses and universities, and even some at middle schools and elementary schools. What say you about that? And what is the education going on in Hungary? And how can we in America kind of breach that gap where, yes, you can have freedom of speech, but there's a line between freedom of speech and hate speech?
Mm-hmm. First of all, last time I checked, Hamas was a terrorist organization. So
thank you.
That puts the whole thing in perspective.
Yes.
And I think it's really weird that, young students who should be the leaders of the future and so on and so forth are openly supporting a terrorist organization which is aimed at killing an entire nation just because their people believe in a certain God and come from a different ethnic background. That's appalling to me, and I honestly do not understand that. And also, if you look at European history, you will see that Central Europe has been a very violent place over time, and each nation tried to kill the other nation at least once. And then we tried to take revenge. And, this repeated itself over and over again. And unfortunately, the last big ethnic group to suffer from that was the Jewish community during the Second World War. We've learned the lessons from that. I mean, the Hungarian state of the time, which used to be under German occupation in 1944, was complicit in the killing of at least 600,000 of our fellow citizens, which is unforgettable. And this is what forms the basic foundation of Hungary to Israel on the one hand, and also to the Jewish community that we have living here in the country. On that account, this is not something that will change, at least not until as long as this government is on power. And we remain committed in protecting our Jewish community, which also means that we're cracking down on terrorist organizations and we're banning protests and rallies which would support the killing of a nation. But it also means that we're supporting Israel on the international level in all ways possible. Just to give you an example of that, the US quit the WHO a couple months back. And we had an internal discussion in there at the time that whether we should do the same. And, one of the major arguments that came up is that, if we're going to leave, nobody's going to protect Israel there, which is a, counterintuitive argument. But, if you have a bunch of states trying to hammer like anti-Israel sentences into all the declarations that these international organizations publish, there has to be someone who stops that. And that's us most of the time, to be very honest, with a few friends from South America and elsewhere. So on that account, we do feel responsible for the fate for the future of the Jewish community. And we also have around 200,000-300,000 Hungarian Israeli dual citizens living in Israel. So the security of Israel is of crucial importance for us as well, because that comes down to our compatriots who live in that country. And of course, there's not much we can do to protect Israel physically, because we're not such a strong nation as the United States. We're a small country in the middle of Europe, 10 million people, quite a small armed force. But whatever we can do, whether it's in international organizations, whether it's in bilateral meetings, whether it's about raising this issue with our friends and allies and not so friendly countries across the world, we will do whatever we can to work with our friends in the Israeli government to keep the flag as high as possible, and also to allow the Jewish community in Hungary to flourish as much as they want to.
So continuing with foreign policy, so does the Hungarian government want to see regime change in Iran?
Well, this is a good question, because we do believe in democracy, and we do believe that people should be able to choose their own government. The answer to that is that if the people of Iran think that there should be a government and they support it, of course we will support that. I mean, our basic policy ever since this government came to power in 2010 was that we really leave this decision with the people of those countries, because who are we to tell them that what kind of government they should have? In exchange, we also expect these countries not to interfere with our domestic policies, something that we have seen in the previous election, and we're seeing at the upcoming election as well, with certain European stakeholders being very much involved in the electoral process and everything around it. But we do think that the fundamental concept of sovereignty is that you have a nation, a community of people, and they are supposed to elect and select the government that they want to live in. We've seen the riots in Iran in January. Of course, they were very concerning, and we've heard loss of life at a very large scale. We hope for the best for the Iranian people, but how that will look like and whether it's going to happen this time, I wouldn't dare to even guess, to be honest. It's been such a complicated country for such a long time that it's pretty impossible to predict what's going to happen.
It's true. It also reminds me of what happened in Gaza. The Palestinian people had the opportunity to pick Abu Mazen or to pick Hamas, and they picked Hamas, and we see what happens.
Yeah, but this also shows you that decisions have consequences. So if you elect a government which is intent on destroying your country, maybe your country will eventually end up being destroyed, and then you will have to face the consequences. And this is why I'm hopeful that the situation in Iran will be resolved as well, because the people know best. Once you give them the opportunity to weigh in on the political process, they will select whatever decision they think is the best for their country and for their individual future too.
I agree with you. Now, this is a question for my Jewish friends. They said, who do we talk to in the Hungarian government to move their embassy to Jerusalem? And this will upset the leftists too.
I don't mind upsetting the leftists. Actually, I get asked this question quite a lot, and the standard answer is that the two prime ministers, are going to discuss this. We've been in close contact with Prime Minister Netanyahu on this issue. He's a very good personal friend of our prime minister, so I think it's really up to them to decide on that.
So I want to ask about CPAC Budapest or CPAC Hungary. How long has that been going on? And it's so interesting that the Prime Minister of Israel will be speaking there, God willing. How did that come to be? And what is the foundation, or what is the plan for that whole mission for CPAC Budapest?
Actually, CPAC Hungary is the biggest CPAC event outside of the United States. And if I remember correctly, is going to be organized for the 5th time this year. And we had quite a lot of American speakers attending, and President Trump usually sends at least a video message. So our cooperation with CPAC and MatchLab and the others have been very close for the last couple of years. And we're very grateful that he was, and the organization took us seriously and was brave enough to come over to Europe, because this is not a natural place for the CPAC people. Having said that, this provided us an opportunity to build a crowd, which we eventually ended up calling the Patriots for Europe, which is the 3rd largest faction in the European Parliament by now after the 2024 election, of like-minded patriots, whom you will find all around the European Union. You have them in Spain, you have them in France, they might even win the next presidential election next year. You will see them in Germany. They used to be on government in the Netherlands, but the Dutch governments usually don't last long. So now they're out of power. They might be coming back. We have a patriot prime minister in the Czech Republic. We have a like-minded prime minister in Slovakia. We have an almost patriot president in Poland. So that kind of conservatism you've been seeing on the rise in the United States has certainly arrived to Europe. Our prime minister used to joke that we were Trump before Trump, in a way that even when President Trump was out of office for 4 years, we carried the torch for him, in a way that we stood up for our country. We truly believed in patriotic policies. We believed in controlling the borders. We believed in competitiveness. We believed in empowering the people. We believed in going after the woke, which have been dominating the US at that time, which was quite unpopular with the mainstream press. But even back then, we thought that, we're not here to please the mainstream press. We're here to represent the Hungarian people. And as far as I see, President Trump has the same approach. He doesn't care about the mainstream press. He cares about the American people. And this is what makes democracy at the end of the day. And we've been running on the ticket for the last 16 years. And I don't think it's such a big surprise that our prime minister is so close to President Trump, because these fundamental principles are the same for both of them.
That's fabulous. Now, in America, unfortunately, we're having a divide with the Republican Party. We have like the alt-right, and then we have the rhinos, which are Republicans in name only. Do you have that situation in Hungary as well?
Actually, we have a rhino party running against us in the election, to be honest. It's really funny, on the one hand, that we don't really have traditional left-wing parties anymore, because most of them were tainted during the communist times. So the left is the post-communist party, or the post-communist side in Central Europe. They went extinct in Poland like 15 years ago, and they might go extinct in Hungary this year once the election is over. But as you would imagine, the globalist forces are always having their local agents on site. And now, because they were unable to defeat us in the 4 previous elections with the leftist ticket, now they're running on a rhino-like ticket with a party which pretends to be conservative, but are much more progressive and much more liberal when it comes to their policies. So, for example, they would like to cut the flex income tax rate that we have in the country. They would like to give up our sovereignty when it comes to giving more powers to Brussels. Also, when it comes to the question of the Eurozone that we've been touching upon in the first section. So, on many, many issues which are crucial for retaining your sovereignty, they are here to compromise. I mean, we're not surprised. This is their job, so it's completely okay for them. But this is, once again, why we have elections, to let the Hungarian people decide whether they want to go our way, which has been very successful in the last 16 years and which is rising all across the transatlantic community, both in the US and in Europe, or they want to go back to the old model, which failed, I think, at latest in 2008, but certainly with the peak of woke and the green ideology in the early 2010s, giving up national sovereignty, opening the borders, having uncontrolled immigration, and basically giving up national sovereignty to the largest extent possible.
Now, as you know, our president has endorsed your prime minister many, many, many times.
We took note of that.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's great. And it was awesome because it happened just before I came to Budapest. So that was even more special. But, to the American people, in your opinion, and I guess the Prime Minister's opinion, does President Trump's endorsement really matter? And is there big significance in his endorsement to Orban?
Well, if there's, Hungarians tend to be a little bit inward looking. So foreign policy is usually not high on the agenda. Because of the war, we have a bit unusual election campaign at this time. And 2022 has been also a bit unusual because the war broke out 6 weeks before the elections. So that obviously dominated the discourse back in the days. But if there's a world leader that the Hungarian people know, that's President Trump. And we made sure that every time he endorsed the prime minister, that was covered in the press very effectively. So on that account, we're very grateful for his support. We think it's going to make a difference. And we're also very grateful to every single member of the U.S. administration, including Secretary Rubio, who took the time to come and visit us since the Trump administration came back. And it was inaugurated almost a little bit more than a year ago in January 2025. So we expect this relationship to continue. But what is even more important, the economic relationship is also doing very well. Just to give you an example, America First is about bringing American investments to the United States for very good reasons. Yet against this backdrop, we were able to welcome a few American businesses investing in Hungary because they know that if for whatever reason they have to work in Europe, market access, proximity to markets, anything like that, Hungary is the best place to do that. We're the most competitive country out there, lowest energy prices, lowest corporate income tax rates. So if you really have to do business in this part of the world, you should be coming here. And with this impetus we got from the very good political relationship, that had an impact on the economic relationship as well. So that's been growing very well. As Secretary Rubio said, we're in the golden age of Hungarian-US cooperation at the time, and we are trying to utilize this to the most extent possible.
That is amazing. We're going through elections over here. We're trying to pass something called the SAVE Act, which I'm sure you've heard of.
Yep.
And we don't understand why the Senate Republicans, which we have the majority, aren't pushing this through. Why they're not cutting the filibuster, because without the filibuster, you need 60, or sorry, with the filibuster, you need 60. Without the filibuster, you can do 50. And then Vice President Vance, J.D. Vance breaks the tie. I don't understand why this is so difficult. Why Senate Republicans don't want to have photo ID requirement. Why we have to have dead people on our rolls, on our voter rolls. Why do illegal immigrants have to vote in our elections? Why do we have 17-year-olds? Because in America, the requirement is 18 years old to vote.
Yep.
So explain the difference, in your voting process, than in America, because President Trump always says, Europe does it best. Europe has election on the day, they have paper ballots, they don't really do the mail-in ballot process, and they know within that night who the winner is. And I'm sure, I think we were saying before the show, people are trying to tamper into your election too. How can we avoid that? How can we stop that and make the elections free and fair?
Mm-hmm. One of the best jokes I've heard about the 2020 election was that, a guy talks to another guy in a bar saying that, hey, my grandpa voted Democrat this time. That would have never happened if he was still alive. Mm-hmm. So, if Europe is very much different in a way that we still need people to show up at the ballot box to vote. Of course, there are some exceptions. So if you're sick, if you're lying in your bed and you cannot go, you can actually phone the Electoral Commission and they will send at least 2 guys with the urn to you so you could cast your ballot, but still that's in person. Mm-hmm. So anybody in Hungary who is a resident of the country has to show up at the election. Of course, you can. If you ask for it in advance, you can vote at a different location. You can vote at the Hungarian embassies abroad if you're on a business trip or visiting friends or family or anything like that. So you can exercise your voting right, but still you have to show up in person. You have to show a photo ID, and you also have to show the card which states your official address. Mm-hmm. So it's impossible that people will show up and vote in your name without the Electoral Commission actually knowing who it is. We have voter rolls. You go into the voting station. They check your papers. They check your name. You have to sign it. So there are multiple processes which make sure that you are eligible to vote and that you're actually casting your vote in a way which is valid. And this is also the reason why we usually have the result at latest the next day, because you have tens of thousands of polling stations. Then the votes get aggregated. That goes to the Central Election Commission, and you have delegates of all the political parties there. So it's not like that, two guys are hiding in the back room and they're stuffing the ballot with free.
Like they do in America?
Oh, never heard of that. So it's very transparent, and obviously the party delegates are always keeping an eye out for each other that none of them will cheat. So that makes it much easier to have the result out very quickly. Of course, when it comes to the votes coming in from abroad, or for those who have been voting on the embassies and other places, that takes a bit more time, but that usually doesn't change the overall result at the end of the day. And you don't really have litigation either around the election results. Of course, you can recount, and it happens occasionally. So when we had the election for the mayor of Budapest 2 years ago, it was very close. So the difference was like 80 votes during the first count and 200 in the second. And there were I think around 800,000 votes cast. So it was a really, really, really tiny difference. But it took only 2 recounts for the losing party to admit defeat and congratulate the winning side. So on that account, I think that kind of public trust you have in the electoral system, just because you have to show up in person on the day of the voting, and just because you have to show your ID, and it's really, still really personal. And on the other hand, it requires an effort from the people to actually, wake up, get dressed, walk to the polling station, then go home. So it's much harder to play with the absentee votes, because people who do care about the political process will be the ones who actually go in person to the polling stations.
Now, do you consider election day in your country like a day off, like kind of like a holiday?
It's always on Sundays. So
okay.
By definition, it's a day off.
There you go. Yeah, because that's what President Trump wants to do. He wants to make, election kind of like a holiday, let everybody get off of work and off of school so they can just come in on the day. But again, these Senate Republicans, for some reason, they just feel that they have to keep the system as it is, and states have to have mail-in ballots. And it's mostly the liberal states that make a difference, or Rust Belt states that President Trump needed to win in 2020 or 2016. And again, this is about the way of the future. And I think you said, if God forbid we go back to a Democrat president, like a Joe Biden type, oh my gosh, I mean, it would be horrible for our country. It would be horrible for our country to work with you guys, because, I mean, you were there under Biden. I mean, oh my God.
Well, it was not the best of times in our bilateral
It was not the best of times. I don't even think you were talking to Biden. You were talking to somebody else.
We did not really have quite a lot of high-level meetings back in those days, but we also had the pandemic for 2 years, so that helped us a little bit.
Thank God. Oh my gosh. So another thing people really asked me about, and this was interesting. So I can tell you, if God forbid President Trump didn't win the presidency, your country was a country that my parents and I were thinking of moving to permanently, to be honest with you. Because you go by.
You're welcome anytime, by the way.
Oh, you're so sweet. You're so sweet. So describe the cost of living in Hungary, because when I was in Budapest, there are a lot of Israelis that have moved there, or they have businesses there or homes there. And I think there are people, I think, as you said, they live like maybe part-time in Budapest and they live in America or other places. So describe, that process.
So basically, there are 2 ways to come here. First is that if you can prove that you have some kind of a Hungarian origin, like 4th, 5th generation Hungarian, your grandparent used to live here like in the mid 1800s, then you can apply for Hungarian citizenship. Of course, you have to have the paperwork, but it's an easier process because, we have millions and millions of Hungarians living outside of the country because of history. And we would like to reconnect with them. We also have a special program for young Hungarian and some ones like Hungarian Americans, Hungarian Canadians, Hungarian Australians, whatever, so they could get a fully funded university scholarship to come here and study. Worst case scenario, they stay here. Best case scenario, they go back and they organize the Hungarian community at the place where they live. But this is something that we introduced a few years back because we want to reconnect with anybody who has any kind of a Hungarian connection, because this is how our nation is going to survive in the long run. So that's one way. That's the easy track. The other way is that, going through the legal immigration process, if you will. So you find a job here, you get a sponsorship letter, and you go through the application process, and then you will get a residence permit, and then you can get started in life. And at a certain point in time, you can pass your citizenship exam, which is quite hard because you also have to learn the language. So on that account, it's a regulated process. But they're more focused on those who do have the Hungarian touch around the world.
Now, how long would it take, let's say, for example, an American to become a Hungarian citizen? How long is that process?
I would say that, if you can find a job here and someone who can sponsor you, you can move here immediately. To get citizenship, 5 to 10 years, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, that's standard. I think it's great. As
we're not so much for naturalizing completely unknown people in 2 days, because if there's a lesson from the illegal immigration wave that hit Europe in 2015, is that if you just throw your borders open, welcome, quote unquote, people with different cultural backgrounds, different social standards en masse, that doesn't lead to anything good, to be honest. We are very, very careful with this.
No, it's good. And I was reading that Hungary is one of the strongest countries in regards to keeping your borders closed, but also heavily vetting the people that want to come across your border. And that was such a big thing, with the Trump administration, the first time, even now, is closing of the borders. But of course, you have the Democrats that want open borders. They want illegal immigrants. And I guess they feel that's the only way they can win elections. Why do you think in some countries they support illegal immigration over legal immigration?
First of all, the election part. I mean, I honestly do not understand that how non-citizens get to vote. I mean, voting is about making a common collective decision within the community that where you guys want to go in the next 4 years. And by definition, members of the community get a say that where that community will go. Not the outsiders, not the press, not a foreign country, but the members of that specific community. In order to be eligible, you have to be a citizen. And this is how our election system works. You have to be a Hungarian citizen in order to be eligible to vote. Of course, local elections are different because of EU regulations. So if there's a Spanish citizen of another EU member state living here, he can get to vote on the mayor and the city council and stuff like that, and it makes sense. But national elections are only open for the nationals of the country. Full stop. No more questions asked. But when it comes to illegal immigration, I think it's a morally very dangerous thing, because the ultimate motivation is economic, that you need cheap labor. But in order to get that cheap labor, you expose all those people trying to cross illegally to the United States and Europe. Horrible, horrible conditions, exposure to violent crime, organized crime groups, you name it. I mean, walking across the Mexican desert, like 150 degrees in the summer, no shade, nothing, just for the promise of, maybe you will cross the border. And as I look at the reports, horrible, horrible things are happening to those people who are trying to make the crossing. And I really don't want to go details about that. So I think it's completely unfair to make a promise to these people that, if you put your life at danger, if you pay thousands of dollars to organized crimes groups, you might enter the United States illegally, where you will also have to hide for the next 20 years until you might get legalized or not, but nobody knows.
Exactly.
And yet, on the other hand, if you need skilled labor, there's a structured way to do that. That's providing working visas for these people on a temporary basis after the necessary vetting process.
Correct.
So it's not that, you have random people showing up at your border, but you might eventually be able to select those, 5,000 IT engineers that you need for your economy. And this is what we are doing. We're completely intolerant of illegal immigration, so the border remains stopped. But if we need people with a specific skill set, we are trying to find them across the world. But once again, that's a structured legal process. It takes time, it takes vetting, lots of other factors are being taken into account. And surprise, surprise, we don't have terrorist attacks in our country.
Thank God.
Whereas Germany does, or France does. I mean, I don't know if you've been, I haven't been to Paris recently, but
I haven't been there in years.
But they say it has changed a lot. And if you look at the history of violent terrorist attacks in France for the last 10 years, that didn't came out of nothing, to be honest. And we do know that, I think it was 2015 or 2016 when you had the Bataclan shooting, like more than 100 people dead, and so on and so forth. And we do know that one of the major perpetrators have been an illegal immigrant coming to Europe. He actually passed through our country, but since we were unable to fingerprint them or anything, nobody ever knew that guy came into the EU, and look what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I honestly do not understand why countries are giving up the right to control that who comes in and who gets out. I mean, it's completely nonsensical to me. Even if you go back to the Greek idea of the state, like the city-state, you have the walls, and you get to say that who comes in and who goes out. Simple as that.
Exactly. One of the biggest things I think is the sex trafficking, the child trafficking, the drug trafficking. That's a huge business.
Yeah.
So when you have people come in illegally, that actually helps that business. And then a lot of these families or these young people are getting paid by the drug cartels to come here illegally. And under the Biden administration, I say Obama, Biden, Obama administration, because Biden wasn't running it.
Yep.
We had hordes amount of fentanyl pouring into our country. Has it ever happened in Hungary? And again, why are all these countries allowing the drug cartels to control everything? And again, I know it's money, but I mean, people are dying from fentanyl and all these opioids. It's not safe. And it's actually young people that are dying from it.
Yeah, the drug situation is a bit different in the US than here because, for example, fentanyl is absolutely not available here in Europe altogether.
That's good.
You might use opioids in hospitals under constant supervision. So it's not something that your GP writes for you and you will just buy it and go to the pharmacy. So that's impossible. We do have drug problems, though, especially with synthetic drugs coming in from all different directions. And we also have the traditional, like heroin, cocaine, and all those kind of things. But synthetic drugs have been a major issue. And we started to crack down on that last year, taking many, many people into custody and trying to go against it. But it's really hard, to be honest. But coming back to the first part of the question, our experience with the migration crisis was that, it was this... those organizing this were the same organized crime groups that we've known for decades. They only switched the commodity that they were exporting. So before that, they were smuggling drugs. Then when it became more profitable, they started to smuggle people. And when it will become more profitable, once the war in Ukraine comes to a close, they will smuggle weapons, which will be available in large quantities at a very low price, because obviously there's so much weapons there that will certainly have to go somewhere. And I see quite a lot of buyers coming up. I mean, if you do remember the Guadalajara incidents last month in Mexico, turns out that many of the cartel members gained their military experience on the front line in Ukraine. And many of the weapons they've been using had something to do with their previous military experience in Europe. So these things always find a way, to be very honest. Occasionally it's hard to prove, but everybody who has eyes sees that. And since Ukraine is the most intensive, at least until the last 2 weeks, Ukraine was the most intense military conflict out there. And there have been records of Latin American volunteers, quote unquote, participating in the fights. I mean, you can put the puzzle together very easily. So I think this is very dangerous. And on the one hand, has a lot to do with organized crime in general, which we have to fight, and it's transnational, so we have to fight it together. But it also has a lot to do with, drug abuse and the availability of all these substances, which are very detrimental to society. So you also have to fight that at the same time. So
maybe you've seen this in America because you're so learned. You see congressmen, senators that are fighting against ICE agents. And ICE, is connected to DHS, and they're there to help Americans, support Americans, get rid of illegal criminals, get them out of our country, and also get rid of the drug cartels. Explain, you're coming from that European perspective, and you're seeing this. Would that ever happen in Hungary? Have you ever seen that, where lawmakers are actually going against important and federal law enforcement agents to protect your citizens?
We occasionally have protests around the parliament when I wouldn't say this happens, because it happens on a much more benign scale. I would say that. So let's say you have a fence around a certain building and they're trying to dismantle it, and obviously the police will come and they will try to keep the fence as much as they can. But at least our police doesn't resort to violence to that extent. because one of the defining experiences of this government were the riots in 2006, when we were in opposition, and our MPs were shot at by tear gas and rubber bullets on the streets as they were protesting the government. So we made a strategic decision that we will never allow this to happen again. And people can demonstrate against whomever they want, not for Hamas, but against whoever they want. And then police will make sure that it's safe. But obviously, there are certain laws that everybody has to follow, and those who do not follow the laws will get arrested. Simple as that. I honestly do not understand that, why American lawmakers are fighting the federal law enforcement agencies. And I even don't get the idea that you might like the police or not, but they are there to provide law and order. And law and order is the foundation of every society. And as much as I used to laugh at these defund the police initiatives, which popped up in Portland, Oregon, and a bunch of other places, the experience has been that defund the police as long as nobody's trying to break into my house, because then I need to call the police to get the whole thing under control. So these things might look very nice on paper, but they never work in practice. And on the other hand, going after illegal immigrants, the most important part of that is illegal. The very fact that he's in that country is that he violated US law. Why you're endorsing those people? I mean, not you, obviously, but why there are people out there who say that it's completely okay to enter the country illegally and you will be fine and nobody will bother you. I mean, your whole relationship with the United States started by breaking the rules. That doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. And it's sad because, again, these are lawmakers. These are people that, we the people elect to put in. And obviously that's not what we support. So that's why I find so asinine that these lawmakers, I guess, they just get into office and they do whatever they want and they really don't care about the people's voice. And that's very, very scary.
Yeah. On the one hand, democracy should be about keeping politicians accountable. So I think at the end of the day, it's really up to the constituencies that what kind of leaders they vote for. I don't have anything to say on that because I'm not a US citizen. It's none of my business which kind of political leaders these people elect. But, from the sovereignty point of view, once again, decisions have consequences. And, if most of the people think that, the government is not taking the country in the direction which is good for them, happened to, Pennsylvania in 2016, that they flipped from blue to red, that will have consequences too.
Exactly. So we just have two more questions left. So one question is, explain why Hungary's strategy is sometimes called, quote, hedging between East and West in regards to Prime Minister Orbán's foreign policy.
We have the foreign policy of connectivity, which means that we're trying to work with everybody who's beneficial for Hungary. And curiously enough, because everybody thought that this wouldn't really go down well with the Trump administration, when Secretary Rubio came here about a month ago, he said that, we're also trading with China, so we're not criticizing you for trading with China. So our foreign policy is based on the national interest, full stop. So whoever brings something of an added value to Hungary, we will welcome them, whether he or she comes from the East or the West or North or South. If we benefit from that relationship, we will support it. Of course, we're aware of the requirements we're facing as NATO and EU members, so we will never threaten the security of our friends and allies. But apart from that, we're going to trade with whomever is interested in trading with us, as long as it's good for the country.
Awesome. And the final question is, when is the Prime Minister's re-election?
It's in, let's say, we are 31 days out, so it's April the 12th.
Oh my gosh. Are you excited?
Of course we're excited. We're just in the final stretch of the campaign, but I'm sure we'll be okay.
Yeah, I can just say our entire network, my show, we completely endorse the Prime Minister and his re-election. We love what he's done for our country. We love the alliance that he has with President Trump and, of course, with Israel. It's very important to me. And I wholeheartedly feel that he will get re-elected with flying colors. I really do.
Amen, as they say it. And please come back anytime. We'd love to.
I would love to. So just tell my viewers how they can look you up on social media, because it's and this is actually, so that was a picture that I took on the dinner cruise of the Parliament. And you can kind of describe a little bit, the Parliament and the beauty that goes in that. I'm actually putting that on a postcard. I just love seeing that at night. It's so beautiful.
Well, bad news is that you guys won't find me on social media because I don't do that, but you can find both of my bosses, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán and the political director Balázs Orbán, on social media. They're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Substack, all over the place. So if you just Google Orbán Hungary, you will find them.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been a great hour. You are more than welcome to come on my show anytime. This has been so great, and we covered so much, and I really, really appreciate you taking out your time.
Thank you. Thanks for the interest, and I'm glad you enjoyed your time in Hungary.
Of course. I definitely will be back.
Looking forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Alexandra, thanks you for watching tonight's Alexandra Levine live podcast. See you at the next packed show, from breaking news to informative topics that will keep you informed. So please click the subscribe button to get notified for upcoming episodes. If you like what the Alexandra talks about, then share the Alexandra Levine live podcast with others. Alexandra also looks forward to seeing you on the next upcoming episode.